You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Danny Boy by TONIA Brown, performed by Otis Jiry. Daniel didn't mean to kill the old woman. He only wanted to scare her. It seemed like a good idea at the time. A little pressure over her mouth and nose, just enough to show her who's boss. Mike said that if you showed an old fart who was the boss, they'd be quiet as a church mouse while you sacked the place. But this one was nothing like a church mouse. She was more like a fish, the way she flopped around on the bed and sucked on his hand like she could breathe right through it. Then she started to thrash, and he pressed harder. And then she wasn't moving at all, not even to breathe, and Daniel knew that was wrong. He jerked his meaty hand away from the old woman's mouth and hovered over her still form. The acrid scent of fresh urine crept to his nose, and he knew what he had done. "Stupid Biddy!" he shouted, and covered his mouth as the sound of his own voice surprised him. His flashlight rolled off the bed and settled on the floor with a loud clatter. Daniel scrambled to his feet and darted his eyes around the darkened bedroom. Mike told him if something awful ever happened on a job not to panic, but he was having a real hard time not panicking. He grabbed his shirt tail and wrung it between his hands until they hurt, but it didn't make the woman any more alive. He closed his eyes and counted to 10, slowly. When he opened them again, the old woman was still there and still dead. "What's done is done, Danny boy," he said aloud. Mike said that a lot. "Get the job done, Danny boy," he added. Mike said that a lot, too. Daniel did his best to ignore the dead woman. He grabbed his duffel bag and flashlight from the floor and turned the beam on the vanity. Most old farts kept their goodies stashed in dresser drawers, as though the thin wood and cheap iron handles would protect their precious jewels. Old people had funny ideas about stuff like that. He came up from his scavenging with $30 in worn-out folded bills. Not much in exchange for life. Daniel swallowed hard and turned back to the corpse on the bed. He lifted his flashlight and ran it over the length of her still body. White wisps of short hair barely covered a livid, spotted head. A flowery nightgown hung on her thin frame, covering her from neck to ankle. In the glow of the flashlight, she looked almost exactly like his mama. Daniel closed his eyes again as the thought shook him hard. He missed his mama, but now wasn't the time for memories. He was on a job and he had to finish. With Mama in the home and Mike gone, Danny boy was the only family left to keep up the house, and the bills piled up when he didn't go on jobs and finish them. He gathered his courage and eyed the old fart hard from across the room. He knew, deep down, that this woman must have something besides $30. He swung his flashlight over her again, and that was when the ring caught his eye. It was gold, or at least looked it, but what glinted in his flashlight beam was a rock the size of a molar. Daniel forgot his memories in a haze of greed. He slid silently across the room and sidled up to the bed. He grabbed the ring and easily slipped it free from her bony finger. A small hush escaped the dead woman's lips. Daniel shot up, ramrod straight with fear. He struggled to breathe as he kept his beam fixed on her face. But the old woman was silent. She stayed dead. Daniel thought he remembered Mike telling him that when someone died, sometimes the air in the body would try to get out. He nearly laughed out loud at his own foolishness. Daniel left through the back door instead of the broken bedroom window, and even remembered to lock the thing behind him. Mike would have been proud of him. As soon as he got home, he pulled the ring out of his pocket and held it up to the bright kitchen light. If it were as real as he thought, Daniel wouldn't have to pull another job for at least a year, maybe more. He wished he could tell Mike all about it, but he was pretty sure the little phones he used to talk through the glass were all bugged. He would have to keep it a secret until Mike came home. Suddenly, Daniel came over feeling woozy. He put the ring back in its pocket and shook his head. A vision of 2 kitchens crisscrossed before his eyes, and he realized what was wrong. He had forgotten to eat before he started, and now it was nearly sunrise, and he was getting that marshmallow feeling he got when his sugar dropped. Mike always made sure Daniel ate right before jobs, so Danny Boy would be sharp as a tack. But Daniel had been too excited to eat, and now he was almost too sick. He crossed the kitchen slowly to the refrigerator, opened the door, crouched in front of the fridge, and eyed the contents with worry. The fridge was a frosty landscape of half-eaten containers of Chinese and moldy pizza boxes. He spied a single apple amidst the containers and reached deep for it. His hand caressed the cold skin of the dead woman's face. Daniel screamed, snatched his hand away, and slammed the fridge door closed. He had seen her face in the fridge, her black pool eyes staring at him, accusing him. He wiped the offended hand on his shirt and then once again grabbed the tail. He twisted it between his hands until they hurt. Daniel didn't want to panic, but it was really hard. He closed his eyes and counted to 10, slowly. Then, blindingly, reached out and grabbed the handle. He opened the fridge first, and then his eyes. Of course, the dead woman wasn't there. She never was. Daniel knew it was his hunger, his low blood sugar, playing tricks on him. It was her own fault, he said. She shouldn't have been so stubborn. He tried hard to believe it. Daniel closed the fridge and settled for a nice, safe can of peaches instead. He sat in his favorite chair and turned on the television. It was almost 5 in the morning, but there would still be plenty of late-night trash on. If there was one thing he could count on, it was the soothing wasteland of TV. In fact, it was the only good thing about Mike being gone. Mike didn't like television, but Danny Boy did. The box flickered to life with a loud argument between a husband, wife, and mistress. Daniel grinned when the screen warmed up enough to show that a goat was somehow involved in the lovers' quarrel. He slurped on a peach slice and laughed out loud. The sound of shattering glass made him nearly choke on the next slice. Daniel dropped the can onto the carpet as he stood. Peaches and syrup leaked all over the dull beige shag underneath his feet, but Daniel ignored it. He instead stared down the hallway toward the bathroom, toward the shatter. "Hello?" he called out. But of course no one answered. No one was there. Daniel followed the dark hallway slowly to the shadowy bathroom. Just outside the doorway he paused and took in a deep breath. He reached into the room, flicked on the light, and then peeked around the corner. He exhaled with relief. A broken glass was scattered across the floor in pieces, and nothing else. He must have left the glass too close to the edge, and it teetered over on its own. That's what happened. Daniel relaxed and decided he'd clean it up later. Satisfied with this, he switched the light off. In the low light of the mirror, the dead woman stood behind him. Her face was drawn in a gaunt mask of humor, with her twisted grin spread wide across yellow teeth. As if the sight of her wasn't horror enough, she raised her hand and grasped the reflection of his shaking shoulder from behind, and he felt the weight of her touch. Daniel whipped around and teetered on suddenly weak legs. He flailed in fear, throwing his fists against the empty air around him. The old woman wasn't there, but the mirror was. The glass spiderwebbed under his fist and shattered into a ripple of bad luck. The pain focused his mind, and the fear left him as suddenly as it came. Daniel cursed under his breath as the first drops of red bloomed from his knuckles. He turned on the tap, held his hand under the running water, and swore aloud at the sting. He stood and stared at the swirl of blood and water running rings around the grungy sink before it slipped down the filthy drain. The sting of the cut throbbed dully, but his embarrassment lingered. Daniel braced himself, glanced up to the mirror, and frowned. The woman wasn't there, of course, and now he was going to have to get a new mirror before Mike came home in December. Or else he'd have to explain what happened, and he couldn't lie. Not to Mike. He was never good at lying to Mike. The old woman was dead, and he was seeing things. That was the truth. Danny Boy was feeling guilty for laying out an old fart, something Mike had done dozens of times. Now he was paying the price. Or maybe it's my sugar, he said to his reflection. Sure, that's it. Mike said sometime low blood sugar made you see stuff. Daniel smiled, tried to believe it, and tried to forget the feeling of her cold hands grasping his shoulders. After he dressed his wound and ate a new can of peaches, Daniel decided it might be time for bed. He wanted to empty his bladder, but the idea of returning to the bathroom made that feeling go away. Instead, he went to his bedroom, hid the ring in his sock drawer, and stripped for bed. He pulled on a pair of worn shorts, his favorite ones, with the hole in the crotch, and flopped onto the bed. Daniel stared at the lamp for a minute or two before he felt stupid for thinking about leaving it on. In the dark of his bedroom, he finally relaxed, and Daniel rolled over in bed and snuggled against the bare mattress. The acrid smell of urine reached his nose, and his eyes flew wide open. There, on the bare mattress beside him, lay a skeletal figure dressed in a flowery nightgown that reached from its bony neck to its withered ankles. The skull rolled around to face him with empty eye sockets. As the jaw dropped, a subtle gasp escaped. Daniel screamed and rolled backwards off the mattress. He hit the floor with a loud thump and didn't stop until he cowered in the corner, his head thrust deep into his lap and his arms shielding him from the vision. Hot tears squirted from his eyes, and he struggled hard to breathe. He knew the woman wasn't there, but that didn't stop the tears. He fought the rising panic and lost. Danny Boy needed Mike right now. He needed Mike to come and make the old lady go away. But Mike wouldn't be home for months. Daniel cried and cried until it was impossible to breathe without sucking in either salty tears or running snot. He would have to do this without Mike. Daniel stopped his crying, held his breath, and raised his head. The mattress was as bare as he left it. A sudden, loud creak caught his attention, and Daniel turned his face to the door. The old woman was standing in the doorway, staring at him with her black pool eyes. She raised a bony hand and pointed at him. "Danny Boy," she whispered in a rattling voice that echoed of death. Daniel screamed again. He scrambled across the floor, and the old woman followed him across the room. She reached for him with her bony hand, clawing the air and saying his name over and over. Daniel screamed and cried, snot smearing his face and clothes as he crawled along on all fours. He reached the bed and pulled himself up while the old woman crooned his name from her waxy lips and shuffled towards him. Daniel grabbed the wrought iron lamp, pulled it free from the nightstand, and brandished it like a weapon. The thing shuffled closer, while it jawed wordlessly and clawed the air in front of him. He brought the lamp down on the nightmare vision. Over and over he slammed the iron lamp into the thing's head. A loud crack sounded, and the terror stopped clawing. It fell to the floor at his feet. Daniel leapt over it and hurried to the living room. Deep down he knew it wasn't real, that if he looked back the woman would be gone. But he wasn't ready to look, not just yet. He almost screamed when the phone rang. Daniel stumbled across the living room and absent-mindedly stared at the ringing phone. He didn't know anyone who would call him so early, or at all. The phone rang in protest to his doubts. Daniel finally picked up the receiver and brought it to his ear. Hello? He asked. Danny boy, Mike said. Mike? Daniel asked. It couldn't be Mike. Mike wasn't allowed to make phone calls where he was. Yeah, kid. Look, I got special permission to call you. Where have you been? I've been trying to get you for days. I was, Daniel said, but stopped when he remembered the phone call was probably being monitored. He had spent the last week getting ready for the job, so he missed Mike's calls, but he couldn't tell Mike what. I was out. I got that, moron. Mike, why are you calling? You coming home? Daniel asked, hopefully. Mike could make the old woman go away. He needed Mike to make the old woman go away for good. No, but I have a surprise for you. You probably already found out, but I wanted to make sure you two were okay. Two? Daniel asked. His stomach turned at the word, at the number. Yeah, you too. They sent Mama back from the home, Danny boy. The last 3 checks bounced, and they refused to keep her. So you finally get your way. Surprise? Bile rose to Daniel's throat, threatening to dump puke and peaches all over the carpet. Mike went on. She should be there already, back in her bedroom, just like the old times. I couldn't get you to answer the phone, so Cousin Phil was supposed to run her home last night and put her to bed. He was also supposed to wait for you, but I guess you were out too long for him. How is she, Danny boy? You there? Daniel stood quietly as he looked down the hallway to the track of bloody footprints he had left behind him. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this story in its entirety. If you enjoy what you hear and what I do and would like to support me and my efforts, visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/Otis Jiry. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button and subscribe today, and share this video with everyone on your social media. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Again, thank you for listening and have a great day. God bless you.